we're surveying for. And these insects, and diseases we don't have currently in the state, but we're on the lookout for, just because they can affect our nursery industry or some of our native plant populations or things like that. And most of these invasive pest surveys are being funded through either the Purdue CAPS survey, the Cooperative Ag Pest Survey, or the PPA 7721, which is the Plant Protection Act 7721, used to be the Farm Bill. So they're being funded by those grants. So the first few things I'm going to talk about here is gypsy moth, kudzu, and emerald ash borer. And the first one here, gypsy moth, it's been around here in Indiana for quite some time. We've been treating for gypsy moth in Indiana since about 1998. But the first gypsy moth was actually caught up in Lake County in the northwestern part of the state in 1972. So 48 years ago was when the first gypsy moth adult male was caught in the state. And this insect was accidentally introduced into the United States in the 1860s. Has been slowly spreading from the east, from that Boston, Massachusetts area where it was introduced, and been slowly spreading kind of south and west through the forested regions of the Appalachian Mountains. Feeds on a variety of different plants, over 300 different kinds of plants, but it prefers the oak trees. Last year, we caught 35,075 moths in the state. That's through our trapping survey. We set traps throughout the whole state. Talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. And this coming summer, we're proposing to treat several sites in Adams, Allen, Miami, Wabash, and Wells County. And some of you may know that we did treat in Huntington County last year. We treated out by the Isaac Walton League with BTK, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a naturally occurring soil bacteria that is effective only on caterpillars. And we also treated with mating disruption surrounding that BTK treatment in that area. Because we did actually find some egg masses in one area. That's where we treated with the BTK. And then the mating disruption, we went around that because we had some outlier traps that caught a few moths here and there, but we were never able to isolate or locate any egg masses. So that's why we did the mating disruption. The gypsy moth is like any moth or butterfly. It has a complete life cycle, 4 stages. The egg mass is present now. It's usually laid sometimes they're laid as early as late June, but most of the time it's right around the 4th of July. Is when those eggs are laid. They overwinter. They look like a little velvety piece of tan velvet stuck on a tree trunk or whatever. They'll lay their eggs anywhere. Those those eggs will then hatch typically in late April. So probably in about another 5 weeks, maybe even sooner if this warm weather continues on. They may hatch a little bit earlier. But those little caterpillars will start emerging from those egg masses. Then they'll start to move up into the canopy of the trees where they'll start to feed on the oak leaves. From there, they will feed through roughly about Father's Day, where they will pupate, and then about 7 to 10 days later, they will emerge as an adult. Now the female gypsy moth adult is all white. She has this, and I don't know if you guys can see my cursor moving here, but I'm pointing here at the female gypsy moth, the all white one. And she has this inverted chevron, this black V pointing to a dot. The male has it too. He's dusky brown here. It's very hard to see, but it's there pointing to the dot. The adult, or the full-grown caterpillar of gypsy moth is very distinctive. It has 5 blue dots followed by 6 red dots down the back. This is the head up here, and they're extremely hairy. There's no other caterpillar that looks like that. So it's a very distinctive caterpillar and an easy way to identify gypsy moth. Ecological damage is pretty devastating, or can be pretty devastating with gypsy moth. They can defoliate a single oak tree within 6 weeks, or even a whole forest if there's enough caterpillar. But defoliating a tree stresses it out. It's unable to produce food for itself, and any carbohydrate that it had stored already now has to go to relief out again. So usually a single defoliation event on a healthy tree won't kill the tree, but if you get continual defoliation year after year, that tree can start losing limbs and die. Another ecological damage, I guess you could say, is that they spread really easily. This photograph here was the undercarriage of a camper that I took a photo of up in Fort Wayne about, it's been 13 years ago now. But this thing was just caked with gypsy moth egg masses. You can see them on the tires and on the leaf springs and the rims and the tubes on the frame. And this guy was going to be leaving for Florida in November. I said, no, you can't do that until we get this thing cleaned up. You'll be moving gypsy moth down to Florida. So we did get the undercarriage of the camper cleaned off, and he was able to go on down on his trip. But this just kind of goes to show that these things can be spread very easily. They'll lay their eggs anywhere, and any item that you might possibly move that then has an egg mass on it, you can move it hundreds of miles in a matter of hours and start a new population. With our survey, we participate in the Slow the Spread project, and that's a cooperative project managed by the U.S. Forest Service. And we place traps throughout the entire state in a grid system. Generally, we try to trap every county, but there are certain areas that we cut out every year based on the fact that we typically don't even catch anything there. And that's usually down in the southern part of the state, whether it's southwest Indiana or south central Indiana. But typically up in this area, we're trapping every year. And like I showed in one of the previous slides, we caught 35,000 moths last year. So that's a pretty good number of moths, but most of those are coming up in these northern counties where some traps we can catch over 1,000 moths in them. That's not uncommon in some areas up in Steuben County and DeKalb and LaGrange counties where gypsy moth is firmly established. So basically, when we're trapping, what that tells us is where the populations are at. Those traps have a pheromone in them that attracts the male moth. And if we get a trap that catches 30 or 40 moths, we can be pretty certain that there's some population there. We then go out on the ground to search for egg masses. And then if we're able to find egg masses, then that helps us decide what we're going to do to try to manage that population. Here's a map of showing where we're proposing to treat this year. Treating over here, northern Miami County with BTK. The red squares or the red outlined areas are BTK treatments, and the blue are mating disruption treatments. We're treating here in LaGros, just on the east side of LaGros, right off the old Blue Star Highway, right between the railroad tracks and 24. We do have some egg masses in that area, and we're also treating Salamone State Forest. And, whoa, my presentation is advancing slides on its own. That's weird. But we are treating LaGros here with mating disruption. We have a very small BTK block here southeast of Ossian. And then we're also treating on the north side of Decatur where we have mating disruption. And then here in Allen County where we actually had some defoliation in the maples area this last year. So those are our proposed gypsy moth treatment sites. If any of you are interested, we have an interactive map on our website that you can go and look at these sites. You can zoom in a little bit closer to kind of see exactly where we're treating. But if you guys are interested in that, feel free to go ahead and take a look. Okay, emerald ash borer. So emerald ash borer is kind of old news. It's obviously been here for quite some time. Introduced into the Detroit area in the 90s through wood packing material that came off ships. It was first found in Steuben County. I believe it was at the Jellystone Campground and right along the Michigan border in 2004. And it is now present in every county in Indiana. Certainly not causing as much damage yet in the southern part of the state, but there are some isolated areas where the killing wave is pretty severe. But it's not like it is up here where up here the population is pretty much kind of crashed down because there's just not enough food source for them to feed on. Again, emerald ash borer, the killer of this is that the larva feeds on the cambium of the ash trees, and basically that deprives the tree of the ability to be able to move water and nutrients up and down. And this picture on the right here is actually Huntington County, taken about 10 years ago. This is looking to the west off State Road 9 as you're coming up to the railroad tracks as you're going north. That wood lot out across that field was all ash. Now the ash are dead and maple trees are kind of coming up in its place. This is a map showing the most current infestations throughout the eastern and midwestern parts of the United States. You know, we have some populations out in Colorado and Texas, certainly not as bad as it is in the Midwest and the Northeast. But again, you know, it's spreading, but through education efforts and regulations from movement of quarantine materials, it's slowed down. But it is still spreading. And one other little bit of news on this, effective in January 14th, the USDA has dropped the federal EAB quarantine. And removing this quarantine stops regulatory activities that the USDA performed. So they will no longer be issuing compliance agreements or performing investigations or issuing any kind of limited permits that would allow movement of regulated material across state lines. That's now falling to the states. And so what they're doing now is they're shifting more of their funding to more tried and effective management strategies like biocontrol. And we are involved in a little bit of biocontrol down in southern Indiana, where the populations are not so large. But up in this area, EAB's kind of run its course. And Cliff Sadoff had released some parasitoids in selected areas up here in the northeast part of the state. So it's kind of past the time to be releasing those now, just because the populations have crashed. And I haven't really heard from Cliff on if those have established. But I think that you know, it's quite possible that they did establish themselves somewhat and can help manage the population a little bit that way if ash trees do start making some sort of recovery, and then emerald ash borer will start to build up its populations alongside that when there's more food source available. So moving on to kudzu. Some people may be surprised that we have kudzu in Indiana, but we do. I think most people think kudzu as being a southern plant. You know, you're driving along I-75 through Kentucky and Tennessee, and you see it swallowing up trees on either side of the road. But it is in Indiana, and it is actually quite hardy. We do have some populations up in the northern part of the state, so it's here, and we are trying to actively manage it. Here are the counties that have kudzu here in Indiana, and again, most of them are south of basically I-70, but we do have a few isolated populations up in the northwestern quadrant of the state. The Howard County population, to my understanding, has been eradicated. It's no longer there. The little population in Elkhart is actually someone was using kudzu as a screen on their porch, and so we tried to work with that homeowner to eradicate that, but they didn't want to get rid of it, and they told us that they would manage it, and they have been managing it and keeping it cut back to make sure it doesn't spread and swallow up the town of Goshen. But it is a pretty aggressive plant. You know, some reports say that it can grow a foot a day in good growing conditions, and it is pretty aggressive. Chemical controls is what we generally use down in southern Indiana, but the results can be fairly variable from location to location. You know, the density of the patch and the age of the patch certainly can influence how that chemical works. If it's a large, healthy population with that's growing on a site with a lot of organic matter, then that population can generally withstand the treatments. And then a lot of times it takes multiple treatments anyway, because we'll treat the population, we'll burn it back, we'll come back the next year, and then there'll be sprouts coming up here or there that we'll have to go out and hand treat. So it's kind of an ongoing process with kudzu. where we go out and we do a treatment. We have to go back and spot spray. We may leave it, let it go for a few years and then return, and we may still then find after a couple of years a few more little patches coming up where it just, the chemical just can't quite completely kill the root system of the plant. And there's so much carbohydrate reserve in those roots that they're able to withstand and even go through a growing season without putting up any vegetative shoots. And then they can, send out more shoots, season 2. So again, the best time to treat is during the fall. And that's true with just about any weeds, because the weed itself is actively taking energy that it's getting and taking it directly to the root system rather than putting it into foliage. So that's the best time to treat for kudzu. Okay, so these are the treatment status for 2020. The blue outlined counties have locations that we feel we have eradicated, although continued monitoring will let us know that. The orange we're not treating, either because the homeowners are managing those, or there's just so much kudzu there that it's not economically possible for us to do so. Those yellow counties are getting very close to eradication. We're going to continue to manage those. And then the light blue ones are ones that we're actively treating. And pink counties, we do try to work with landowners and provide them with some technical assistance on how to treat it themselves. And so those counties in pink are the ones that the landowners themselves are actively treating. All right, so now moving on to our invasive pest surveys. And we got quite a few. This year, we're planning to survey for Asian longhorn beetle. And this is quite a large insect. It's usually 2 to sometimes 3 inches long. It can be pretty big. It's a native of Asia. Was first detected in Brooklyn, New York in 1996. There are current infestations in Massachusetts, New York, and Ohio, and most recently, just last fall, they found it in South Carolina. So the closest one to us, of course, is Ohio. It's just on the east side of Cincinnati, in Bethel, Ohio, and they've cut over 100,000 trees in that area to try to eradicate this. I think they're slowly getting a hold on it, but it takes many, many years of actively surveying and climbing trees and looking for symptoms and signs of the insect to eradicate it from an area. We did have an interception of this insect last year in Valparaiso. We had a phone call from a warehouse just outside of Valparaiso, actually an email, where a gentleman had taken a photo of one of these in the warehouse, and he had sent the photo actually to his son, who then kind of looked it up and told him, "Hey, you better call somebody about this. This is bad news." But unfortunately, at that time, the insect had gotten away from him in the warehouse. Well, fortunately, he was able to relocate it a few days later and capture it, and we did identify it as Asian longhorn beetle. At that point, we started doing visual surveys and trapping surveys around that warehouse. We did not find any other detections of this insect. So we feel that it was just kind of an isolated incident. However, we are going to continue to survey this year and do more extended visual surveys in Valparaiso this year to see if we can detect any more of these, because this is a pretty bad insect. It likes to feed on mainly maple, but will feed on quite a few other species as well. Will feed on birch, will feed on sycamore, likes buckeye, so it's got quite a wide host range. The damage that this insect causes, it mainly it causes structural damage, but the first thing that it will do is the female will chew this little pit in the bark to lay an egg, and then that egg will hatch, and that larva will burrow into the cambium and feed in the cambium just for a short while, but then it will bore deeper into the heartwood. and that's where it starts to mine out the heartwood, and that's where the structural integrity of the tree starts to fail when you get quite a few of these. You can see here in this middle photo all these holes that are in this maple tree, and those are where the adults have kind of bored themselves out of the bark, and the hole will be about the size of a number 2 pencil, and you'll be able to insert that number 2 pencil quite a ways in the tree. It won't just go in a few millimeters and stop. You'll be able to actually push it in there quite a ways. And another symptom that generally you will find around a tree infested with this, and this is true with a lot of different bark beetles, or I'm sorry, a lot of different longhorn beetles, but you will find sawdust, and this sawdust will generally be accumulating in the branch crotches and around the ground at the base of the tree, and that's one sign, a possible sign that you have a tree that could be infested with Asian longhorn beetle. One other sign is just kind of a thinning of the upper crown. Almost looks like this tree is starting to get some earth fall color, but you'll start losing some branches. The branches will start to lose their leaves. Those leaves will turn color and drop off, and then you'll really be able to see the damage and from the holes and from the insect boring out. Okay, boxwood blight. Now this is a disease that only affects boxwood. Calanectria pseudonaviculata usually starts appearing when you have warm, moist conditions, and when temperatures are usually around 86 degrees or so at most. Once it gets up in the 90s, it starts killing the fungal mycelia, so the fungus becomes inactive. And this disease can survive quite a long time in leaf debris, up to 5 years. The fungal spores can remain viable in leaf debris. This disease is quite a problem out east. They're losing quite a few boxwoods. It causes the plants to just drop their foliage, and you kind of see here it's in a nursery setting. These trees are these boxwoods are just dropping leaves like crazy. It's quite a devastating disease, because boxwood is a very popular landscape plant, and there's a lot of different varieties. This can be pretty devastating to boxwood producers. Usually get stem lesions. I don't know if you can see this very well, but you can kind of see this black stem lesion on this boxwood stem. And a lot of times too, what'll happen is you'll start to also get just small black lesions on the leaves as well. And so that then starts to spread throughout the leaf tissue, and those leaves will then drop off. You can also get, as those lesions on the stems start to girdle that stem, then you start to get death in the stems and eventually just death in the entire plant. We are conducting boxwood blight surveys throughout the state at nurseries. Over the last several years, we've inspected over 156, almost 157,000 plants for this disease at 61 locations in 34 counties. And so far, we have not detected boxwood blight at all in the state of Indiana. We have had some instances where some infested plants have been brought in, and those plants were destroyed immediately to some of the big box stores, but we have not found any boxwood in the landscape, and so that's a good thing. Okay, sudden oak death is another big issue. This is mainly a disease that's affecting the tan oaks out in the West Coast, but it also has quite a large host range and affects a lot of other plants as well. And generally, though, with oak trees, it can kill them, but with some of the other alternate host plants, it just causes a blight. But those alternate host plants can transmit it then to the oak trees, and some of those host plants include rhododendron, Kalmia latifolia, which is mountain laurel, Pyrus viburnum, camellias, even magnolias, lilacs. There's a host list, I think, that contains a couple of hundred plants that can be transmitters or vectors of this disease, and spread it into the oak population. We have been doing sod surveys in Indiana for as long as I can remember. Ever since I've been here, we've been doing sudden oak death surveys. And basically what we do is we go to retail nurseries. We look for symptoms of the disease on plants, and those symptoms can include wilting back of foliage or just leaf spots, total wilting back of branches. And every year, each nursery inspector collects at least 20 samples to be sent in to be tested for Phytophthora omorum, which is the sudden oak death fungus. We have had some detections in Indiana, in Porter County in 2006 and St. Joe County in 2012. And we also had a pretty major problem in 2019 with this disease, where we were having a lot of rhododendrons and some lilacs and some viburnums that were being shipped into Walmarts. We traced these plants back to a nursery in Oklahoma that nursery in Oklahoma actually received their stock from a nursery in Oregon. So this is kind of what we were seeing in the rhododendrons. You can see this wilting of the top. The fungus gets into the foliage and starts working its way back down through the stem and into the root system. And it's a Phytophthora, which is generally like a root rot type of fungus. So basically, it's killing the stem as it's moving down to the root system and causing this wilt. And then you can also get other symptoms like this one here. I believe this is a lilac. I forget what variety of lilac this is, but you can see that's kind of a different type of water-soaked type of symptom as well, that can affect those leaves. So hemlock woolly adelgid is another insect that we're surveying for. This is highly destructive to our native hemlocks. Indiana does have quite a few hemlocks, mostly in the west central parts of the state, down through the south central part of the state. And this insect was first discovered in the Richmond, Virginia area. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this menu out of the way so you don't have to see it. Hopefully that's not affecting you guys. But it was discovered in a Richmond, Virginia park in the early 1950s. It is native to Asia, and they have tested the US population genetically and traced it back to Japan. Initially, this insect was spreading pretty slowly because they did find it in a park setting. But once it got into the forests and into the Appalachian Mountains, and to some of the hemlock populations, it started to explode. It's now present in 17 states. And what this insect is, it's like an adelgid is similar to an aphid. It's very tiny. It's got a sucking mouth part, and it inserts its mouth part into the plant and begins to suck juices out of the plant. Now, hemlock woolly adelgid also produces this cottony, waxy type of material. Looks like cotton balls. And that'll be on the underside of the branch, and they always attach themselves at the base of the needles. And as they're feeding, the feeding causes the needles to turn yellow, and then they'll start to fall off. And you can kind of see here on the left, this picture was taken up in Michigan, and the needles are starting to yellow up. And then this center picture is you're seeing a whole tree that's starting to just get that off green color, kind of olive sort of color, because the insect is sucking all the juices out of it. And then over here on the right, you can see just hemlock that are totally dead, that have been just completely killed by hemlock woolly adelgid. So this is the current distribution of hemlock woolly adelgid, and you can kind of see we have just to the north of us along Lake Michigan and around Holland, Michigan. We have some populations there, and this is really concerning because our hemlocks are kind of remnant populations that were kind of left behind by the glaciers, and so they're very isolated. So we're kind of hoping that them being so isolated, that's going to kind of protect them from any kind of natural spread of this insect. We are doing state surveys. We are surveying our native populations and evaluating them for hemlock woolly adelgid. This map kind of shows what we've kind of done so far, and that kind of orange area right in there is basically where our native hemlock are. All those other green dots outside of there are landscape plants. But our native hemlock populations are extremely remote. They're usually in the deep hollows down in southern Indiana in the Hoosier National Forest, or if any of you have ever been over to Shade State Park or Turkey Run State Park or in that area, there is a lot of hemlock down there. It's probably actually higher density of hemlock in Montgomery, Fountain, and Park counties than there are in some of the other areas in southern Indiana. There are a lot of hemlock down there. And this is just an example of some of our hemlock here. These were some pictures taken down at Turkey Run State Park when I was down there doing some survey work. And you can just kind of see how large some of these trees are. And this one's kind of growing straight out of the rock horizontally, and then decides to take a 90-degree and grow up. This tree here, you can see my iPad down here at the bottom. My iPad is 7.5 inches wide. That makes that tree over 50 inches in diameter. That is a humongous hemlock. And this middle picture, this middle tree right here is that very tree. It can't quite tell. You know, it doesn't look that big in this picture, but when you put my iPad next to it, it's a really, really big tree. That tree is probably at least 200 years old, or probably more. But it's just really neat areas down in there, and those hemlock are very, very impressive and would be very devastating to lose them to hemlock woolly adelgid. Okay, thousand cankers disease of walnut. This is an insect disease complex. The disease is called thousand cankers disease, but the fungus that makes up that part of the complex is called Geosmithia morbida. And then the walnut twig beetle is the carrier of that disease. And this disease can kill black walnut, and just about any kind of walnut. There are a few species that are resistant, but black walnut is very susceptible. The walnut twig beetle is a native North American insect. It's native to the Pacific Southwest and northern Mexico. But the fungus, there's not a whole lot known about it. It's not known if it's a native to that same area, or if it happens to be an invasive. So there's still a lot of work being done to determine where that fungus came from originally. Indiana does have an external quarantine against states that are positive for thousand cankers disease, and many of those states are in the West Coast. Although we do have some eastern states that have thousand cankers disease. Those states are Tennessee, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. And I think there's also been some discovered in a spot in Ohio. But we do have an external quarantine for thousand cankers disease. And what that basically means is that any walnut product that's not treated, that's originating from one of those states, cannot come in basically unless it's been treated. It's just to kind of to safeguard our walnut trees to make sure the fungus doesn't become established here. Now again, to have thousand cankers disease, you have to have the walnut twig beetle, you have to have Geosmithia morbida, and you have to have a susceptible host. And with those three combinations, you can get thousand cankers disease in your walnut trees. So the symptoms of thousand cankers disease is just basically what it says. It's a canker, and those cankers are not very big. Most of the time, they're about the size of a pencil eraser. But what happens is you get thousands of little attacks by these walnut twig beetles, and then you end up ultimately getting thousands of little cankers that then blend together, and then they start girdling the tree trunk, or I'm sorry, the branches. And that's where you start to get, the tree will start to drop leaves. The leaves themselves will initially kind of start to turn olive green, and then they'll actually start withering. That's the sign of thousand cankers disease, is withering leaves in a walnut tree. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that every walnut tree that has withering leaves or yellowing leaves has thousand cankers disease, because I've seen walnut trees that have had broken branches that have very similar. Those symptoms are very similar when a branch breaks, and also walnut can be drought sensitive. And especially in August, if we get a really hot and dry August, those leaves will start to yellow, and that could be a potential, can be cause for confusion, and you can think you might have thousand cankers disease when it's in fact just the tree growing through drought stress. So we have not detected or confirmed thousand cankers disease in Indiana. The walnut twig beetle we have caught. We have intercepted it through traps at sawmills and log yards in the state. And we have also found the fungus. However, we have found the fungus being carried on some other insects, some other ambrosia beetles and some other weevils, which was kind of out of the norm, we thought at the time, because we thought, okay, we got the walnut twig beetle, it's the carrier of thousand cankers disease or the fungus. But when we started finding it on other insects too, we started getting a little concerned that maybe there's some other vectors of this disease. But it's appearing at this point now that those other insects are not really good carriers of this disease. They may carry some of the spores on their body, but they're not carrying enough to cause an infection of a tree. So it looks like walnut twig beetle is the true vector of this disease, and some of these other ambrosia beetles are just happen to be carrying it in their bodies. And the one other good thing that appears to be good about thousand cankers disease, if I could say that, is that it doesn't seem to be a very serious issue here in the eastern United States. Back in 2010, when thousand cankers disease was first discovered in Knoxville, Tennessee, those trees were just dying like crazy in Knoxville. But the years leading up to 2010 down there they were having severe drought. So those trees were already under severe stress. And then what happened was a few years later, they had much better growing conditions during the summer. And some of those trees that were initially infested were actually beginning to recover. And even some of those trees ended up having 90% canopy regrowth. So that's a pretty good sign that this disease may not be as serious a problem as that it was initially thought, and that it's really only going to attack stressed and dying trees rather than healthy trees. So that's good news. We are continuing to survey for this insect. Reason being is that we want to facilitate exports of walnut logs and lumber. And I believe like the European Union has quarantines on lumber coming from the state of Indiana, because we have detected the walnut twig beetle in the state, even though we haven't found the disease in a tree. So in order for us to not be quarantined anymore by the European Union, we have to have 3 consecutive seasons where we do not catch any walnut twig beetle. And so we're continuing to survey for that insect. And then hopefully over the next few years, they will no longer consider us as having, the walnut twig beetle. And that will help alleviate some of the headaches in exporting walnut logs and lumber to the European Union countries. Okay, the next insect that we're surveying for this year is silver Y moth. This looks just like any old scruffy little looper moth that flies around in corn and bean fields during the summertime. But this one's actually a little bit different in that it has kind of a wider host range. It is native to Greenland and Europe and North Africa. It does feed on over 200 kinds of vegetables and plants and field crops. But this one also feeds on grape. And Indiana actually does have a fairly good winery industry and has several vineyards that we're looking to kind of protect. And so our trapping survey for this insect is concentrated at vineyards. The adults of this insect are anywhere from about 1 7/16 to 1 9/16 inches long. And the larvae are roughly about 1 inch to 1 9/16. And the silver Y moth actually gets its name. If you see this on the forewing of this insect, you see this little silvery kind of Y-shaped set of scales here. That's where it gets its name. The difficulty with identifying this insect, though, is that there are a lot of different looper moths that look very similar. A lot of them may have even a similar silver marking on them, or they may have a marking where it's kind of broken right in here, where there's a little brown streak right through that part of the wing. And so when IDing these, you have to start looking at the legs and have to look at the spines on the legs and whether they have spines or whether they don't have spines. And so we generally, when we're trapping for this insect, we generally catch a lot of look-alike moths that we then have to kind of really get under a scope and look at very carefully to make sure that they're not silver Y moth. And then if we do get one that's close, then we have to send it to a specialist to have their tail ends dissected, and then that's how they can confirm whether it's silver Y moth or it's some other species. Another moth that we're looking at is golden twin spot moth, and this is very similar to silver Y moth. Again, it's a looper moth, and it is also native to about the same range as silver Y moth. This one has been detected in Canada before in greenhouse settings, but it will also feed on, again, a variety of vegetable crops, including tomatoes and potatoes. And I don't know if any of you realize this, but Indiana is actually the #3 producer of tomatoes in the country. So we do have quite a few acreage, a lot of acreage of tomatoes, especially in the northern part of the state. And of course, red gold is down in Alexandria area, Elwood area, I believe. But this moth is slightly smaller than silver Y moth. But the golden twin spot, you can see here, it's named aptly because it has 2 little goldenish spots on its forewings. And then the larvae themselves are about 1 5/16 to 1.5 inches long. And these critters will feed on, these things will feed on the actual fruits of the tomatoes. So they can cause quite a bit of yield loss on the tomatoes themselves, not only through feeding on the foliage and skeletonizing, but also feeding on the tomatoes. Okay, and the last insect I'm going to talk about here is spotted lanternfly. I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more because this one is the one we're probably currently most concerned about. This is a pretty devastating insect out east right now. It's causing a lot of problems. Right now, it started in Berks County, Pennsylvania. They discovered it in 2014, and they believe it got shipped. Egg masses of this insect got shipped over here on a stone shipment of, I believe, granite that came from China. It is native to China, India, and Japan, and Vietnam, and it's also introduced into Korea, where it's a huge problem. But this is also a pest of grape and apple and stone fruits. Its main host, though, is tree of heaven. And if it would only feed on tree of heaven, we wouldn't have a problem. But it's got quite a large host range. Not only does it feed on these that I've shown here, but it will also feed on maple and walnut and apples. So it's got a lot of different hosts and can cause quite a bit of problems. So this has 1 generation a year. And right about this time of year, you have the egg masses that are present. That's this photo up here. And the egg mass, some people describe it as looking like a smear of mud on a tree trunk or wherever the egg may be laid. Over time, it'll start to crack because the female puts a waxy secretion over the top of it. And when that waxy secretion is fresh, it actually kind of looks like silly putty. It has that same kind of sheen to it. But as it dries out, it starts to crack like mud. They'll hatch typically in late April through May, sometimes as early as sometimes they don't hatch until early June, but that's pretty rare. And when they first hatch out, they look like ticks. They look like little ticks with white spots, very tiny. As they continue to develop, they just get a little bit larger. The second instar, this may be covered up with this. Move that up there. The second instar is in early June to early July. And then the third instar is from late June to mid-July. And those three instars all look very similar. And the fourth instar, they kind of have a color change. They turn a really scarlet red with white spots and black streaks. And then in August, late July to August, they will turn into adults. And the adults, like in the previous picture here, if I can scroll back to that first picture, you can see here their hind wings are very, very brightly colored. It's actually quite pretty. But their forewings are kind of a tan color with the black spots on them. So the adults will then feed for a while. They won't lay eggs immediately. They have to feed and build up their energy reserves, and then they will start to lay eggs from about September to November. Now these things will lay eggs almost anywhere. Again, here you can kind of see the egg mass here on the bottom of this picnic table. They're kind of like gypsy moth, and then they really like to hide their eggs. And here's more of a close-up of the egg mass here. You can see it kind of does look like a little splotch of mud, and it's starting to crack. One other thing that they do is that they are very gregarious. They like to kind of congregate and hang out together. And they have a piercing sucking mouthpart that pierces into the plant tissue and begins to suck out the sap. And very similar to an aphid, they excrete that sap, and it's like pure sugar. And they can actually fairly forcefully eject that, and it comes out in a stream. But that pure sugar then ferments and will also produce quite a bit of sooty mold. And you can see at the base of this tree of heaven here, all this black sooty mold that's on the ground. But if they're in a vineyard feeding, because they do like to feed on grapes, that sooty mold then will be growing on the fruit and then the foliage of the plants, and that reduces yield for the vineyard, or for the vineyard owner, and can have devastating effects to the quality of the crop and quality of the fruit. We are very concerned about the pathways that this insect can get spread. It likes to hitchhike. It can hitchhike on semis, nursery stock, flagstone. It can even hitch rides on trains. And very concerning how this insect can spread. You can see here this map. This map here shows the infestation in Pennsylvania, well, actually the eastern United States. You can kind of see the original area of infestation was right in this area, Berks County, which is kind of southeastern Pennsylvania. You can see this line moving westward. Well, that line corresponds to a major Norfolk Southern rail line that starts in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and goes up to State College, where Penn State is, and then moves into Pittsburgh. Well, that line moves on up into Cleveland, Toledo, through northern Indiana to Chicago. So that's why we're really concerned, and we feel that the pathway that this insect is going to get introduced to Indiana is by rail. Some of the inspectors out in Pennsylvania were talking about how these things will just jump on slow-moving trains. And actually, you can see how this is spread down into Virginia. That's also a rail line going down into northern Virginia. So our plans for this this coming year are to do pathway surveys. We're going to conduct visual surveys at rest areas, truck stops, near rail yards and rail corridors, landscape supply companies, and we're all going to do all this during their peak flight, which is from August through October. We're also going to conduct windshield surveys in urban areas to identify tree of heaven and to inspect those tree of heaven for life stages of spotted lanternfly. And we're also, for the first time, going to try to do some trapping. Trapping isn't really an approved method for this insect because there's not really a lure that will attract it. But Penn State has and Cornell have kind of come up with a new type of circle trap that utilizes some milk cartons that you cut the top off the milk carton, you attach some mesh to it, and then you wrap that mesh around the screening around the tree, and then that will funnel the spotted lanternfly, if they're present, up through those milk carton and cut off milk cartons into a big Ziploc bag where they're trapped. Initially, trapping was done with sticky cards, but they're having a lot of problem getting bycatch of other insects, as well as tree frogs and birds, and even some small mammals. So these new circle traps help alleviate that problem where we're not having the bycatch of the off-target insects and birds and mammals. So yeah, this is a pretty devastating insect, and we're certainly hoping that it doesn't come to Indiana, but I think it's just a matter of time before it gets here. So if you guys, if any of you spot anything new or different, please feel free to contact the DNR. You can call our 866-NO-EXOTIC number, which is 866-663-9684. You can email us there at the depp@dnr.in.gov, or you can also report it through the Report IN website or the app, and that information will come to us as well. And if it's anything suspicious, doesn't have to just be any of the insects that I talked about today, or even if you just have an insect that you're not sure about, we'd rather you send us some information or picture or something like that, so we can get it identified. And we'd rather have it be a negative than have it be a positive that we didn't know about. I thank everybody for your time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. And that's what I've got for you today. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and ask away.
Okay, I think you can unmute yourself, or you can type a question in the chat room. And then I'm going to run a poll here real quick. We're going to try this tonight. And if you could answer this poll for me really quick while you're thinking of any questions, I'd appreciate it. And so if you could just click on the answer that, if anybody can do this, just give you a few seconds here to answer this poll. I really appreciate it. It's kind of a thing we like to do for these sessions, just to get a little feedback from people. And okay, we'll run it for another few seconds here, but if anybody has, go ahead and type a question in the chat, or like I said, unmute yourself and just go ahead and start talking to Vince if you've got a question. Okay, I'll give you just about 10 more seconds here on this polling. I think we got about everybody answering, but thank you for participating in that. Okay. What questions do you have? Vince, I really appreciate that on the lanternfly. That was in our Master Gardener basic training. I just went through kind of a presentation on invasive species, and that's one that I was really wanting to hear more about. So that was very beneficial.
Yeah, we're really concerned about that critter, and we're trying to stay ahead of the game with it, and hopefully we can detect it early. There's enough tree of heaven here in this state that that it's not going to go for a lack of food, that's for sure.
Okay, we got a question here from Tim. He's just asking, what are the most critical invasive trees, bushes like honeysuckle and tree of heaven?
The most critical? Well, I think you nailed two of them right there. But I think you could also probably add Callery pear to that list. You could add autumn olive to that list. You could add burning bush. You could add Japanese barberry. We have a new terrestrial plant rule that just came out. We just had to begin enforcing last spring, of course, when COVID hit, and so it made it even more difficult to try to enforce that terrestrial plant rule. But there was a list of 44 plant species on that list that are no longer for sale in Indiana because of their invasive qualities. I don't have the list in my head at the moment, but it includes tree of heaven, autumn olive. It includes all of the bush honeysuckles. There's quite a few plants on that list, and initially, Callery pear and Norway maple were being looked at for that list. But what we have to do is, as we're looking at these plants, we have to do an economic analysis, and we have to kind of survey the nursery industry to see how much inventory they have of some of those plants. And at the time, there's just too much. There's going to be too much economic damage to the industry because too many of those nurseries have those plants. We are evaluating those plants here in the next round for the next round to add to the terrestrial plant rule. And so we'll kind of see what happens with that. And we're also looking at burning bush as well, because all of those can escape and just take over areas and outcompete some of our native vegetation. So.
Okay, I think I fixed it so you can unmute if there's a question you want to ask. I know Sharon was asking, how do you describe the tree of heaven? How could you describe it for Vince?
Well, yeah, tree of heaven is it's got very smooth bark. The leaves are compound, but they have a little notch. I wish I had a picture of it. It'd be a lot easier to show you. But usually will grow in waste places and urban areas. They have the females will actually have a seed pod, a samara, similar to like a maple tree, and then the buds are very very stout, and the branches are usually upturned, almost like somebody holding their hand up like this. I don't know if you can see that, but the branches kind of arc upward, and they grow. They'll grow just about anywhere, and also they're very toxic. They have a toxic sap, and when you break open the branches, they're just foul smelling. They just smell awful, and actually, when the female is flowering, the flowers smell too, and they're actually pollinated by flies. So flies love them. They probably smell like a carcass or something to them. But yeah. Actually, they have a leaf that actually kind of looks similar to a walnut, I suppose, but it does have a little notch at the base of the leaf, whereas walnuts are smooth at that base. So if I had a picture, it'd be easier for me to kind of put up and kind of show you. But that's kind of how they look like if I can try to describe them to you.
Okay, my name is Liz, and I have a comment.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This winter, my kitchen was full of fruit flies until I got rid of my 2 poinsettias.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you sure they were fruit flies?
Well, they were like what you would get if you had fruit in your kitchen and it was a warm kitchen.
Okay.
They were
'Cause-
bitty bugs that were on the cabinets, on the
Okay.
counters,
So
and
without actually seeing them, it's kind of hard to. I mean, they could, because a lot of times what may happen is you might, if you have indoor house plants, you may also have fungus gnats, and fungus gnats actually the larvae can live in your potting soil in your plants, especially if you keep it moist. Are you familiar with those?
I got rid of everything.
Got rid of everything? Okay.
Poinsettias, my potted plants, you name it, I
Okay.
got rid of it.
Okay.
And they finally went away. But
so-
I went online and it said poinsettias could have them.
Oh,
So
really? Okay.
it
So-
didn't come until I got the poinsettias.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, fruit flies are generally attracted to fruit, fermenting fruits
I
and things
agree.
like that, or anything else that's fermenting. So it's that would be it's kind of odd to hear that those could have been fruit flies.
Well,
So
what else would you call them? I mean, they were little bitty bugs like fruit flies.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. They may have been fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are tiny flies, just like fruit flies.
Okay.
And that could very well have been fungus gnats, and those are a lot of times associated with house plants. You bring a plant in that's moist, and you'll see them flying around. That's just little black little flies, and that could have been what it is. But without actually seeing the specimen, it's kind of hard to tell.
But the plants had been here for a long time.
That day.
I got rid of them all. I mean, everything's wiped out of my
Okay.
house
Okay, but then they disappeared when the plants disappeared.
when everything disappeared.
When everything disappeared.
Yes. I thought
Yeah.
it was interesting. I'm just bringing that up to say it was interesting.
I would
Okay.
agree with Vince. I would say fungus gnats is like, we've had them here in the office before, and they can be pretty nasty.
Well, I must have had fungus gnats and okay. So thank you. Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
That's the best we can say without actually seeing them. So,
I know. So I just thought it was interesting. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think Jeff, my cohort in Wabash, had asked a question earlier about gypsy moth sites in Wabash that are being treated. I think he showed the map, so I think that
cover him.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. But any other questions for Vince before we sign off here this evening?
Yeah, and going back to that gypsy moth actually too, that one BTK site that was in LeGros, actually it just jogged my memory. It got switched over to a mating disruption.
Okay.
We're going to go in there. We're going to go in there and hand treat the eggs because we only found them on a few isolated trees. And so that one spot east of LeGros where we did have BTK scheduled, we're now going to do mating disruption there in addition to the mating disruption over Salamone.
So are you, I guess just on that line, are you going to do some kind of a public meeting in Wabash area for people or?
Yeah, we had our public meetings back in January.
That's all right. You said, I think you mentioned that. Yeah. Okay.
They were all virtual this year.
They're all virtual. Okay. Okay. Any last questions for Vince? We appreciate you staying a little extra here to answer questions. And
I apologize. I think I might have ran a little bit over. So.
Well, that's fine. We appreciate you sticking around to ask questions. So. Well, thank you everybody for your participation and for helping us with that poll. We'd like to do some of these, I think, in the future more. And Master Gardeners these are always good for me I always learn something myself and when we have these forums. So If anybody has suggestions for future forums, please let me know. So have a good night. Happy St. Patty's Day.
Night. Yeah, you too.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Vince.
You.
Hey, thanks, Ed.